Welcome back. Today we're going to be speaking to Alia Salem, the Executive Director of FACE, and an interfaith activist in the Dallas area since 2004. She's a close friend of Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, who was held hostage in Colleyville, Texas, by a man demanding the freedom of Aafia Siddiqui. Let's talk to Alia. Thank you so much for being here today, Alia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alia, tell us what happened and what was your reaction sitting in Austin watching what was taking place in your hometown?
So I described it as a maelstrom of emotion because, when you hear this kind of stuff, and especially those who are activists in the Muslim community, we're not unaccustomed to hearing this kind of horrible bad news or developing situations, etc. But then when you get like little tidbits of information that it's, near your hometown, that it's, a place where you are very familiar with and have been to a bazillion times, and then you see, the names of places that and then it dawns on you that the rabbi of the four people, because they didn't name him for a long time. And when they named the synagogue and it said a rabbi was being held hostage, I can't describe what I felt in that moment accurately enough, because it was a feeling of panic. It was a feeling of fear. It was a feeling of loss before anything had even happened. And a sense of urgency that, do I go there? Do I, what do I do? And then just grief, just overwhelming, grief and sadness that this was happening. And I, immediately texted people. I knew in my heart that it was him because he's the rabbi at that facility. But I was hoping maybe they hired somebody else. And I texted everybody I could think of. I texted media contacts and friends. I texted community leaders. And then one of my other friends, who's also a rabbi in Dallas, she texted me back and confirmed that it was him. And I exploded into tears because it was all this pent up anxiety of watching things happening and then realizing it's somebody that you know and love and care about, is an indescribable feeling. And I'm sure other people can relate as well. And then once you overcome the initial shock, then it's, what can I do? How can I help? What needs to happen? And that's a whole nother set of emotions, and even to the point of, trying to, I remember feeling the sense of like, if I go there, maybe I can talk to this person, like very irrational, ways of thinking, that maybe I can calm them down. Maybe I can, I'm going to walk into a synagogue and talk to, a madman who's holding four people hostage and convince him. But that's, when you love somebody and when you care about a community, you're willing to do anything. And so that was kind of the cycle that I went through in the immediate aftermath of finding out. And I didn't find out till much later in the day. So I didn't have to suffer nearly as long as some of my friends and colleagues had to.
And this community, tell us more about the synagogue. Tell us more about the interfaith work that you all have done together, and how has both the communities, the Muslim community and the Jewish community, been supportive of each other during these very tough years?
So I got active in the interfaith community back in 2004. I had started college, and I, really got involved with the Muslim community a lot more, and found out about a group called the Daughters of Abraham. And not very long after, I met a rabbi. Her name was Hena Citron Walker, who is the wife of Charlie. And she and I spent a great deal of time, trying to work together. She is the principal the head over an organization called the Multicultural Alliance, that was based primarily in Colleyville, but served a lot of the North Texas area. And so she and I worked a lot around diversity issues and interfaith issues, et cetera. And she started a chapter of the Daughters of Abraham, which is how she and I met. Primarily, she started a chapter in her area. And so Beth Israel became the hub, if you will, for, we call that area the Mid-Cities area, which is Colleyville and some surrounding localities like Euless and South Lake and Hurst, et cetera. And so Beth Israel, the Daughters of Abraham, is exactly what it sounds like. It's an interfaith group that focuses on Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women. And so Beth Israel, where Charlie is the rabbi of, it was the Jewish center point, and that synagogue was the house of worship that was a part of the Daughters of Abraham. And so me being heavily involved in the Fort Worth side of the Daughters of Abraham and having helped start a chapter there was, kind of the impetus for being really involved. And so that's how I got to know Adina and Charlie really well and develop a close relationship with them, and then constantly attending events. And this is all work that was started post 9/11 to try and strengthen our community ties. And so this particular synagogue and that particular rabbi and his wife, I mean, you can't hardly mention Rabbi Charlie without mentioning Rabbi Adina, because they're just, so they're so interconnected, and not only as spouses and life partners, but also, doing this work. And so with that, and the church and the masjid there in Colleyville, Islamic Association of Mid-Cities, it was, a constant source of community work and bridge building. And when horrible stuff happened in the Muslim community, they were always there and always on the front lines. So it wasn't just in the times of, calmness and these lovely educational opportunities for interfaith bridge building that make you feel warm and fuzzy. It was in the really tough times as well that they, took up the mantle of being true allies and always standing with us through thick and thin, and even through, international global issues. I mean, everybody's well aware of, some of the tension that exists surrounding Israel and Palestine. And so they've always been there as a staunchly pro-Palestinian activist working for Palestinian freedom. There were long, tough conversations that I would have with Rabbi Adina and Rabbi Charlie, and moments that were really tough to get through. And they were always so calm and so patient and so understanding and so open, and always taking, the stance of love and listening and learning and trying to do the work, right? The real work, not just the warm and fuzzy stuff, but the real work of how we think about all of these issues in our community and how important it is for us to all stick together. So when I say that synagogue and those individuals, and Rabbi Charlie in particular, are a part of the glue that keep our community thriving, it is not an overstatement. It is a deep understatement.
So what do you think of the FBI's statement that this had nothing to do with anti-Semitism, or the fact that this was a synagogue? What were your thoughts when you saw that statement from the FBI?
So, I have to be honest, I don't focus a lot of my attention on what the FBI says. That is in large part to my personal beliefs on how the criminal legal system operates in the United States, and particularly the FBI, and what the FBI has meant to my community. So I don't put a lot of weight on it from a day-to-day perspective. But, hearing you talk about it, I don't know. What I do know is that the Jewish community, much like the Muslim community, are constantly being targeted for harassment, for hate crimes, for violence. And we know that as much as, the Black Christian community know that with church burnings and the Black community at large know that as being targeted, and other marginalized communities. And so, you know, perhaps it wasn't. Maybe it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. I don't know all of that, but what I know is that's what it feels like. It feels like that they're targeted because they were Jewish. It feels like that this is, whether it's latent or overt anti-Semitism at play. I think that must have play some part. But I have still more work to do in reading and listening and learning. I have been much more focused on, the safety of my friends and how they're doing, and trying to do whatever I can to help this situation. But in the end, it doesn't matter in the long run, other than how we go about learning from it. What matters is that these people were held hostage for over 12 hours, and they were terrified and horrified, and didn't deserve to go through that. And because of my relationship with Charlie and with Rabbi Adina, both of them, literally the kindest, sweetest people in the world. And for them to have to go through this is just gut-wrenching. So it's hard for me to separate and put my professional analytical hat on, because they're my friends. And they've, it takes on a different persona. It takes on a different, perspective. You don't care why. His life was in danger, and that's all I cared about.
And you are on another intersection as well. You're also have been involved in the Free Aafia movement, and recently, especially. So so there was another layer to this horrific tragedy. What were your thoughts then?
So if I do put on my Islamophobia hat, and I do put on the hat of doing work against political prisoners and post 9/11 political prisoners, and Dr. Aafia in particular, when I started reading it, I was like, this doesn't make sense. First of all, I'm familiar with Dr. Muhammad Siddiqui, your brother, who lives in Houston. I was like, he is just not, that's not matching up with his personality. It doesn't match up with his, modus operandi. He doesn't go through the world like that. But, you always leave a little bit of space of, I don't know him personally, and I don't know what I don't know, but it didn't sound normal. It didn't sound like that was a thing. What it more sounded like were, a situation where somebody has, built up something in their mind, and have decided, and I don't even know what all the individual who perpetrated this act was going through, so I don't want to presuppose too much, but what it sounded like was just much more haphazard, and much more I'm at a loss for words on what I'm trying to think about, but it was so chaotic. It wasn't some sort of, methodical hostage situation where you see, criminal masterminds that are, conducting this situation. It looked much more like the ramble, when you saw the video, and, you've heard stuff, since then. It seemed much more like an episode of psychosis, and something having to do with a mental health issue, rather than, some nefarious terrorist plot that is, rooted in something of an international, perspective, having to do with Al Qaeda or ISIS or this, or like, it didn't have those It didn't have those feelings when I was watching it play out, and it didn't make sense. And I also know about Dr. Aafia, and I know what her, particular beliefs are and her calls are for, and what our, movement calls for. It calls for a nonviolent approach. And so it is something that is rooted in peaceful resistance and is rooted in peaceful activism. And so somebody who's truly part of the Free Aafia movement would never do something like that. And so that's kind of immediately what went off in my head. But again, ancillary to the bigger issue at large with the individuals who are being held hostage and having to go through what they were going through, it just didn't match up in terms of what I understood, because I certainly don't espouse those beliefs. And nobody that I know espouses those beliefs who are in the Free Aafia movement. And it's a shame that somebody does that in the name of somebody who rejects that kind of behavior, and the people who are part of this movement reject that kind of behavior. And so it's important to mention that, so people understand that you can't conflate these two things and make them synonymous with one another. It has nothing to do with her.
Thank you for saying that. And it was pretty tragic that corporate media jumped on Mohammed Siddiqui's name. The Aafia Foundation did talk to him and very quickly put out that this was not Mohammed Siddiqui at all who was inside the synagogue. So now let's go back to the Jewish community. What do you think? You're being watched by people in North America, Canada, Mexico. What would you say to our audience? How should the communities support a community who's gone, the Jewish community especially, who's gone through this horrific incident, and where a place of worship, which is sanctified, and especially in the Islamic tradition, all places of worship are sanctified. Where do we go? What's next? How do we come out of this in support?
Gosh, that is such a big question, Hena. I think what I would tell people is, in all communities, especially those of us who have gone through such a difficult time of being, the target of state violence and being surveilled and being constantly watched and considered only in the terms of national security. It's a very, beleaguered place to be in. We always try to empathize with other communities, and so much has been made of the relationship between the Muslim and the Jewish community, and a lot of it has to do with, stances on Israel-Palestine. And I want people to understand that there is a space where we can push past what we don't know, push past our fears, push past our, even our own misconceptions, and even our own rooted biases that we have to, confront as a community of people. And whether you're Muslim or not Muslim, whatever your background is, I encourage everybody to take the steps to do the real work of reaching out to people, reaching out to your neighbors who are in the Jewish community. I guarantee you they are scared right now. I don't even have to ask anybody to know that they are wondering if their synagogue and temple is next. They're wondering if there are other people out there who seek to do them harm. And if you have it within your capacity to reach out and let them know that you have their back, that you will not let anybody, come in between you and them, and that you will stand by them through thick and thin, it goes such a long way. But you have to actually do it. Don't do lip service and just say that, or say something on social media. Take a step and reach out. These are our brothers and sisters in humanity. They are the people of the book. They are our neighbors. And we have to build a world where we can trust each other so that we can work on the really big issues together, so that we can help each other see, right and wrong, and in the context of this, in the context of that. Because a lot of us have been fed information and have been consuming information that is really hard to digest and is something that is not going to be easily undone overnight or worked through or fixed overnight. That has to do with all of the things that come into play, and what I think most people understand what I'm talking about. But it's only when you actually make those relationships and you stick through them no matter what. You stick through them and you center love and humanity, that you can actually start to create the influence that has that domino effect of bridging, these gaps and working towards real peace that will have the long-lasting effects like the ones that were created here. It's not just what did I use? The term that I used was an empty performative type of kumbaya. It's a real roll up your sleeves, get dirty, have the tough conversations kind of work, but letting them know that you're here for them and that they are your neighbors and your friends, and you will stand beside them.
Thank you so much for your time, Alia, and good luck on your work at FACE. And thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me.